Governments love to promise prosperity. They speak of freedom, stability, and opportunity, wrapping their intentions in comforting language that makes citizens feel protected. But if you peel back the polished speeches and trace the flow of money throughout history, you will find a darker truth. Governments have mastered a set of financial tricks that quietly drain wealth from ordinary people while enriching the elites who control the system. These tricks are old, far older than modern nations, and they have been recycled for centuries under new names and new disguises. The patterns are consistent, the outcomes predictable, and the victims almost always the same. To understand how governments keep people broke today, you have to start thousands of years ago with the simplest trick in the book: inflation. When a government spends beyond its means, it has two choices: raise taxes openly or debase the currency silently. Ancient Rome chose the silent route. The denarius, once made of nearly pure silver, was repeatedly diluted as emperors struggled to fund their armies and pay their debts. They melted coins, mixed in cheaper metals, and sent them back into circulation as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Prices soared as the real value of money collapsed. Ordinary Romans watched their savings evaporate, wages lag behind costs, and financial stability dissolve into chaos. Inflation became a weapon, an invisible tax, allowing the state to take wealth without ever admitting it. And although modern governments don't melt coins anymore, central banks achieve the same effect with the push of a button. When trillions are created out of thin air in the name of stimulus, the result echoes Rome. Your purchasing power weakens, your savings lose value, and your cost of living rises relentlessly. The trick has endured for 2,000 years because it's effective, silent, and easy to disguise as economic growth. As time passed, rulers discovered more direct tactics. During the Middle Ages, monarchs in England, France, and Spain routinely issued forced loans. Wealthy merchants and guilds were told to lend money to the crown for wars or emergencies. The word loan implied choice, but refusal meant fines, confiscation, or imprisonment. Kings called it patriotism. Subjects called it survival. These forced loans rarely returned full value, if they were repaid at all. It was taxation with a polite mask. And although forced loans no longer exist in their old form, the spirit persists. Today we see mandatory retirement contributions spent instantly instead of saved, emergency levies during crises, and financial obligations framed as civic duty even when the burden falls overwhelmingly on ordinary citizens. The extraction evolves, but the exploit remains. By the 17th century, governments needed bigger, more efficient tools. Britain found one in 1694 when it created the Bank of England, not out of generosity, but out of desperation. The government needed money to wage war against France, so it invited wealthy investors to lend funds in exchange for guaranteed interest. The guarantees were backed by taxes on everyday goods: salt, beer, tobacco, cloth. The wealthy lent money. The poor paid the interest. This system, government debt, became one of the most powerful mechanisms of wealth transfer in history. Bondholders became a financial elite, earning stable returns insulated from risk. Meanwhile, citizens shouldered the burden through consumption taxes that rose to fund interest payments. Even today, government bonds remain the safest investments for the rich, precisely because governments can always extract money from taxpayers to pay them back. It is a perfect loop. The public funds the profits of the wealthy, quietly and consistently, without ever realizing it. As the centuries turned, the tricks only became more complex. Modern governments embraced deficit spending, borrowing staggering amounts to finance everything from wars to infrastructure to political promises. They reassure the public that this debt is manageable, necessary, or even beneficial. But debt must be repaid eventually, and governments repay it the same way they always have: higher taxes, reduced services, or inflation that erodes the cost of repayment at the expense of ordinary citizens. When governments announce trillion-dollar spending packages, most people cheer for the benefits. Few realize the long-term cost will be borne by them, their children, or their grandchildren. The trick is timing: spend now, extract later. Then there are bailouts, perhaps the most brazen modern trick. In 2008, reckless financial institutions gambled with the global housing market and nearly collapsed the world economy. Instead of allowing them to face consequences, governments used taxpayer money to rescue banks deemed too big to fail. The public funded the bailout. The executives kept their bonuses. And within years, the same institutions grew even larger than before. This model, privatize gains, socialize losses, has become standard. Ordinary people bear the risk while elites reap the rewards. Governments justify it as protecting the system, but the system they protect is one where the top cannot lose and the bottom cannot win. Pension systems reveal another layer of illusion. Workers spend decades contributing to government-managed funds, believing their money is being saved for retirement. But many governments spend those funds immediately, replacing them with promises and IOUs. The hope is that future taxpayers will cover the obligations. This only works as long as the population grows and the economy expands indefinitely. When demographics shift, fewer workers supporting more retirees, the math collapses. Governments respond by cutting benefits, raising retirement ages, or letting inflation erode the real value of payouts. Citizens who plan their entire lives around these systems learn too late that the promises were unsustainable from the start. The trick is trust. People trust the government, and the government relies on that trust to spend money it doesn't have. Complexity is perhaps the most underrated trick of all. Modern financial systems are intentionally complicated. Tax codes stretch thousands of pages. Budgets contain hidden line items. Monetary policy uses jargon the average person cannot decipher. Financial instruments are designed so obscurely that even professionals misunderstand them. This complexity creates fog, a haze in which wealth can be extracted unnoticed. Ancient Rome's debased coins were obvious. Today's tools are invisible spreadsheets, quiet policy tweaks, and subtle regulatory changes that shift billions with no public scrutiny. When people don't understand the rules, they can't resist the outcomes. Complexity protects the system by keeping the public ignorant. War finance adds another chapter to this story. In both world wars, governments issued massive bonds marketed as patriotic investments. Families sacrificed to buy them, believing they were supporting soldiers abroad. And they were. But these bonds also guaranteed lucrative returns to wealthy investors, backed by future taxpayers. Modern wars, like those in Iraq and Afghanistan, follow the same pattern. Defense contractors earn billions, lenders receive interest, and ordinary citizens inherit the bill through taxes and inflation. Wars end. The debt remains. And the interest paid on that debt becomes one of the most reliable streams of wealth transfer in existence. One of the newest tricks is quantitative easing. After the 2008 crisis, central banks created trillions to buy bonds and stabilize markets. They claimed it was necessary to prevent collapse. And in some ways it was. But the benefits flowed almost entirely to asset owners, people who held stocks, real estate, and corporate debt. As markets soared, the wealthy became wealthier. Meanwhile, average households saw minimal improvement, while inflation crept upward and distorted the economy. Money creation saved the system for those at the top, while quietly increasing the cost of living for everyone else. It was a rescue for the elite, disguised as a rescue for the nation. Stealth taxation is another subtle tool, using inflation, fuel taxes, consumption taxes, and fees to extract money without touching income tax rates. Governments avoid raising income taxes because it's unpopular. Instead, they raise the cost of living through indirect taxes that people barely notice but constantly pay. When your grocery bill rises, when gas becomes more expensive, when rent inflates faster than wages, you feel poorer but don't see the hidden hands behind the squeeze. Inflation is the most effective stealth tax of all. It reduces the real value of government debt, but destroys purchasing power for citizens. Governments benefit. You lose. Regulatory capture deepens the trick. Laws meant to protect the public often end up written by the industries they regulate. Railroads in the 1800s, oil companies in the 1900s, tech and finance today. Each helped shape rules that limit competition and maximize profits. Governments present these regulations as consumer protections. Insiders see them as opportunities. Just as street gangs once learned to own the referee instead of fighting the game, corporations use regulation to tilt the playing field. Governments appear protective, but the true beneficiaries are the industries with the most influence. At the core of all these tricks is one fundamental requirement. public ignorance. Governments depend on citizens who don't study economic history, who don't understand monetary policy, and who don't question the system. People accept inflation as natural, taxes as necessary, debt as harmless, and bailouts as essential. They assume the government works for them because the alternative feels too overwhelming to confront. Yet history shows that when people don't understand the financial system, they become fuel for it. Their labor funds it. Their savings sustain it. Their belief legitimizes it. And their ignorance protects it. Why does this matter now? Because the tricks are accelerating. Inflation is rising. Debt is exploding. Bailouts are more frequent. Complexity is deepening. And the gap between the elites who understand the game and the masses who don't is widening. Governments insist the system works for everyone, but the outcomes reveal the truth. The system works extremely well for a small group of insiders, moderately for those who understand the rules, and terribly for everyone else. The financial elite grows stronger. The average household works harder for less. And the system continues functioning exactly as designed. So what should you do? You start by seeing the tricks for what they are. When a government prints money, you recognize it as a reduction in your purchasing power. When a bailout occurs, you understand it as a transfer from taxpayers to corporations. When debt increases, you know future generations will pay the price. When regulations appear, you ask who benefits from them. When pensions are promised, you study whether the math is real or political fiction. And above all, you stop assuming the system is built for your benefit. Systems exist to preserve themselves, not you. The history of government finance is not a tale of incompetence. It is a story of incentives. Every empire, monarchy, republic, and democracy has used financial tricks to extract wealth from citizens. Ancient Rome debased coins. Medieval kings forced loans. Early modern governments built national debt. Modern nations rely on inflation, bailouts, and complexity. The tools evolve. The incentives stay the same. If you understand these tricks, you can protect yourself. If you don't, you become a participant in your own impoverishment. History doesn't repeat perfectly, but it rhymes loudly. The same tricks that kept Roman citizens struggling are draining your bank account today, only hidden behind modern terminology and digital systems that look sophisticated but function exactly the same. The real question is not whether governments use financial tricks. It's whether you recognize them before they crush you. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe. History has every answer you were never taught, and I'll show you what they don't want you to know.